For decades, the ceremonial sword of King George VI lay cloaked in silence, hidden in whispers, erased from records, and believed to be lost in the shadows of royal history. But everything changed when one chilling archival revelation placed it directly in the hands of Prince William. Why had this blade been concealed? And who knew what it truly represented? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The legend of King George VI's ceremonial sword has always lingered in the corners of royal folklore, an artifact of war, honor, and stoic resilience. It wasn't just a piece of history, it was an extension of a monarch who led Britain through its darkest hours. Stories suggested the sword had been forged under secrecy and consecrated during the height of the Second World War, a symbol of unity and fortitude amidst chaos. Yet after George VI's passing, it vanished without ceremony. Unlike other royal heirlooms catalogued and displayed, this blade was never listed, never shown, and never spoken of publicly again. To many, it was simply lost to time. But in the quiet backrooms of Windsor, whispers persisted that one document, long sealed and deliberately withheld, might still reveal its final fate, fueled by curiosity and something deeper, perhaps an instinctual need to understand what legacy was truly his. Prince William authorized a discreet archival investigation. He and his closest aides combed through sealed records, bypassing the conventional inventories, consulting unredacted transcripts, and studying wartime correspondence. At first, it was fruitless. But eventually, tucked within a sealed envelope addressed to a long-retired steward, they found it, a single parchment referencing the sword's existence. It was labeled with 6 chilling words, "For him who must never forget." That line alone sent shivers through William's inner circle. The implication wasn't ceremonial, it was personal. What made matters more unsettling was the immediate resistance they faced from within. Certain palace aides, normally indifferent to such searches, began blocking access to additional files. Requests were delayed, archives were suddenly under review. One aide was reportedly overheard saying, "This one should have stayed buried." William, known for his composure, pressed harder. He wanted truth, not permission. And as layers of secrecy began to crack, it became evident this wasn't just about a missing weapon. It was about something far more explosive, a forgotten declaration of royal intent that bypassed the present king entirely and pointed directly at the future. But what William's team uncovered next didn't just unearth a missing sword, it threatened to sever loyalties, legacies, and the very foundation of modern royal succession. It began with a whispered warning from a retired royal archivist: not everything was meant to be found. What he handed over wasn't just an inventory buried within dusty correspondence and sealed parchments, was a will. A will that would tilt the royal hierarchy on its head. The man was frail, his hands shaking as he slid the leather-bound folder across the table to William's aide. His eyes, aged by time and royal secrets, betrayed the weight of what he was about to unveil. For decades, he had been the silent gatekeeper of Windsor's most sensitive records, those not bound by protocol or protocol-bound inventories. He had long sworn never to speak, unless the monarchy stood at a crossroads. Now, he claimed, that moment had come. Inside the folder were handwritten letters, clipped receipts from a bygone era, and one sealed envelope embossed with the royal crest. Its label read, "For the eyes of the bloodline." What lay within that envelope was nothing short of explosive. A final addendum to King George VI's private will, unregistered, hidden away, and never discussed publicly. The language was unflinching and precise. The ceremonial sword, forged and wielded during the darkest years of the Second World War, was to be entrusted solely to the eldest direct male descendant. No mention of the sitting monarch, no reference to the Queen Consort, just one heir, one name etched between the lines: William. It wasn't symbolic, it was intentional. And once verified, there was no room for reinterpretation. Legal experts were swiftly brought in. The signatures were examined, the ink dated, the parchment authenticated. Every attempt to discredit the will collapsed under the sheer clarity of its origin. And yet, the reaction behind palace walls was not one of celebration, it was dread. Select courtiers, those who had built their power in the shadows of Charles's reign panicked. This wasn't just a relic being passed down, it was a challenge to the throne's image. If William was now the only rightful bearer of a wartime monarch's blade, what else had been written into the future without them knowing? In hushed corners of Windsor, protocols were rewritten overnight. Legal teams whispered about implications, public image strategists crafted diversion plans, and aides debated whether the discovery should be leaked or buried once more. One senior advisor reportedly declared, "This changes everything if it gets out." And in that moment, William's quiet pursuit had transformed into a constitutional flashpoint. He didn't ask for a crown, he never demanded power, but this sword and the will it rode in on spoke louder than any modern proclamation. But while William now had the legal claim, he still had no possession of the sword, and someone was determined to keep it buried. As news of the sword's willful transfer reached Camilla, her composure reportedly shattered behind palace walls. She'd fought to reframe royal authority, and now a relic from the past had recentered it on William. Was it just about the sword or something far deeper? For years, Queen Camilla had worked meticulously to redefine the monarchy's ceremonial landscape. She had modernized appearances, elevated her own public role, and quietly shifted emphasis away from older, male-centric traditions. In her mind, relics like the ceremonial sword were historic ornaments, powerful, yes, but symbolic, not sovereign. So when the revelation came that King George VI had not only preserved the blade but specifica, willed it to Prince William, the symbolism wasn't just threatening, it was devastating. It bypassed her husband, it bypassed her. And in the intricate hierarchy of royal influence, such a gesture, though buried in parchment and decades-old ink, spoke louder than any recent decree. Behind closed doors, her reaction was immediate. A leaked conversation, relayed through a trusted staffer, reportedly captured Camilla in a rare moment of fury, overlooked again. "After everything I've done." Those words echoed far beyond their immediate context, because beneath the surface of ceremony lay a deeper ache, the persistent feeling that despite holding the crown beside Charles, her place in the monarchy remained conditional. To have the past override her present influence reawakened insecurities she thought buried. The sword had become more than a weapon or relic. It was a challenge to the order she had helped build. The tension between Queen Camilla and Prince William, already simmering for months, ignited. Sources claimed that Camilla began quietly instructing her aides to stall. Delays emerged in document verification, archival clearances became mysteriously tangled, and previously accessible files were suddenly declared under internal review. These tactics, while subtle, were unmistakable. William noticed. His team noticed. The move was not direct opposition, but strategic obstruction, a war not of words, but of access. And Charles, caught between his wife and his son, wavered. He sympathized with Camilla's concern about optics and tradition, but even he could not ignore the authenticity of the will. He reportedly said in private, "The past speaks. And it commands." That single line became a quiet turning point, because no matter how Camilla resisted, no matter how much was delayed, one truth remained undeniable. The vault had been located. The sword existed, and it would not stay hidden much longer. Yet even Camilla's fury couldn't stop what was coming next, because the vault was finally opened, and what lay inside would leave the entire royal circle breathless. It wasn't just a sword, it was a time capsule of intent. As the vault opened after decades of silence, historians and royals gasped. The blade, pristine, gleamed with an inscription no one expected. A direct message from a monarch to a future king, bypassing an entire generation. The moment had been anticipated, resisted, even delayed. But now it was undeniable. After navigating legal hurdles, whispered resistance, and Camilla's silent pushback, the vault beneath Windsor finally surrendered its secret. Protected behind layers of reinforced steel and red-sealed permissions, the chamber had remained untouched for nearly 70 years. Only a handful of names had ever been cleared to access it, but William's name, backed by King George VI's own hand, opened the door. When the sword was first lifted from its velvet-lined case, silence consumed the room. No corrosion, no dust, as if time itself had bowed to the weapon's purpose. Historians on site were stunned. One whispered, "It's as though he knew it would be needed again." Every detail of the sword, its balance, its engraving, its weight, spoke of deliberate craftsmanship. But it was the inscription along the blade's edge that silenced everyone. Etched in clean, royal script, "To him who leads through silence, not spectacle." 6W. Ords. But their message roared. This wasn't just a handover. It was judgment. A subtle but devastating rebuke of performative power, theatrical monarchy, and hollow pageantry. It wasn't difficult for those present to interpret who the words weren't meant for, and that understanding hit the heart of the room like thunder. William stepped forward. For a man trained to hide his emotions, that moment nearly broke him. No crown, no throne, no official ceremony, yet in his hands was proof that his great-grandfather had seen something in him. A strength not forged by speeches or spectacle, but by restraint, composure, and readiness. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Just one breath, one look down at the blade. And in that moment, history seemed to recognize him not as the future king, but as the rightful heir to an unspoken legacy. Catherine stood nearby, silent too. But her face betrayed what words could not. Those who witnessed it would later say she looked as though she had glimpsed destiny, and it terrified her. Because with that sword, William hadn't just inherited a relic. He had inherited the burden of knowing he was chosen long before the world ever believed he was ready. And behind that choice loomed sacrifice, pain, and war. Not the kind fought on battlefields, but within the marble walls of their own palace. But just as the blade returned to the light, a different shadow began to spread. An internal rebellion was brewing, and not everyone welcomed William's triumph. When Prince Harry learned the sword was not just found, but formally entrusted to William, his silence didn't last long. Sources reveal a scathing letter sent privately, and then a shocking podcast moment. Hat hinted at betrayal, secrecy, and an irrevocable rift between brothers. The revelation tore open something raw. For the first time, Harry was forced to confront in plain language that the ceremonial lineage had never included him, not even as a symbolic presence. It wasn't merely that he had stepped away from royal duty, it was that the past had quietly written him out before he ever chose to leave. Leaked messages painted a picture of deep frustration. Friends described him pacing, questioning why the family had never spoken honestly about the sword, why so much had been hidden, and why William, once his confidant, had become the sole keeper of a legacy Harry felt emotionally connected to, but legally exiled from. Then came the podcast. With careful phrasing and a voice heavy with restrained hurt, he said, "Some things are handed down in silence, others ripped away." He never named the sword. He didn't have to. The world understood. Meghan, according to insiders, urged him not to simply accept the narrative. She reportedly encouraged him to at least explore legal pathways, not necessarily to claim the blade, but to demand transparency, to force the truth into daylight. That suggestion alone sent shockwaves through the palace. Royal aides scrambled to contain the wildfire. Statements were drafted, then withdrawn. Briefings were planned, then postponed. Every attempt to calm speculation only fueled it further. Commentators spoke of favoritism. Others whispered about destiny. And through all of it, William remained silent, refusing to be drawn into a public tug-of-war with the brother he once protected. That silence was misread as arrogance by some, as composure by others. But in reality, it was something more complex. A man shouldering a burden he had never asked for, trying to honor a monarch's instruction without humiliating his own blood. The distance between the sons of Diana grew wider, colder, sharper. What had started as an archival discovery was becoming a psychological battlefield, laced with memory, resentment, and a haunting awareness that love and duty no longer walked side by side. Palace insiders confessed that this was the first time they truly feared the brothers might never reconcile, not because of money, not because of interviews, but because history itself had chosen one and left the other standing outside, staring through a locked door. Yet even as headlines devoured Harry's anger and commentators dissected every syllable he spoke, something else was beginning to move quietly behind the scenes, something William was preparing, not out of pride, but out of conviction, turning the sword from a private inheritance into a declaration of purpose. But while the media focused on Harry's fury, they missed the strategic move William made next, one that turned the sword into a symbol far more powerful than anyone expected. The sword was never meant to collect dust in a vault again. William planned a ceremony, one that would revive ancient rites and declare his vision for the monarchy. But King Charles had other ideas. And when palace aides intervened, William made a daring decision that stunned Britain. In the wake of escalating headlines and private tensions, William knew he had to act not for glory, but to honor the weight of what he had received. The ceremonial sword of King George VI was never designed to live in silence. It had been passed, not given, willed, not forgotten. And to keep it hidden, after all that had been revealed, would be a betrayal of legacy. William didn't want pomp or fanfare. He proposed something different, a private yet symbolically potent gathering at Windsor, where the sword would be presented, blessed, and displayed as a reawakening of tradition, not for spectacle, but for continuity. It would be quiet, controlled, and steeped in dignity. But even that modest request stirred unease within the palace walls. Charles hesitated. The timing, he feared, would send the wrong message. With public confidence already divided, he reportedly told advisors the optics could be misinterpreted as coronation theatre. It wasn't just his concern. Camilla, increasingly on edge since the will's exposure, made her position unmistakably clear. According to a senior aide, she warned that the sight of William brandishing the sword could blur the line between heir and sovereign and cast a premature shadow over the reigning monarch. The proposal was denied clearance. Officially, it was deferred. In reality, it was buried. But William, for all his discipline and patience, had inherited something else from the lineage George VI once carried: resolve. Quiet, unwavering resolve. And so, without approval, he moved forward. In a hushed but defiant gesture, he held the ceremony privately. Trusted allies were invited. No cameras were permitted, at least not officially. The event took place within Windsor's oldest chapel, beneath stained glass worn by centuries. There were no speeches, no declarations. Just a blade once buried, now raised, restored in spirit, reclaimed in purpose. What happened next? No one predicted. Hours later, a series of leaked photographs surfaced. They weren't grand or posed. But in them, William stood holding the sword aloft, expression solemn, eyes lowered. The leak set fire to media channels. Some hailed it as a bold return to tradition. Others called it a silent act of rebellion. But the message was unmissable. William wasn't waiting for permission to live the legacy written for him. He had accepted it. And in that moment, the public saw not just an heir, but a leader with conviction. But while the sword was now publicly seen in William's hands, its presence had stirred old ghosts, and a warning from the past was about to resurface. Alongside the sword, hidden behind a false panel in the vault, was something no one expected: a letter. In the unmistakable handwriting of King George VI, it carried a prophetic tone addressed not by name, but by role, to the future bearer of this blade. That single line sent a chill through the room, heavier than the weight of steel ever could. The letter was dated just weeks before the king's death, sealed in wax, untouched by time, and unread by any monarch or heir since. It was a message not meant for the immediate future, but for the one who would rise when the royal soul was fractured, when unity was no longer assumed but fought for. And now it was in William's hands. The contents were deeply personal, written in a voice that trembled with foresight. George VI spoke not as a sovereign addressing a subject, but as a grandfather speaking to a descendant he would never meet. He spoke of fear, not of war or politics, but of a monarchy losing its quiet purpose. He warned of times when ceremony would outshine service, when spectacle would drown out substance, and when those who craved the crown might forget the burden it truly carried. He described the public storms he feared were still to come, and the internal threats that would not arrive with armies, but with betrayal, pride, and ambition wrapped in tradition. Then came the core of the letter, a vision of leadership so at odds with what the modern monarchy had become. He wrote, "The one who bears this blade must lead not with grandeur but with silence, not with applause but with resolve. For the louder the throne becomes, the more the people will stop listening." There was no doubt. George VI hadn't just chosen William. He had anticipated him. He had envisioned a monarch who could restore what had quietly slipped away, dignity, not through dominance, but through restraint. The most haunting line was saved for last. It read, "This sword is not for defense, but for reminder." 6 words that cast the entire inheritance in a different light. The sword was never meant to be held in triumph. It was to be a symbol of accountability, a mirror to the soul of the monarchy, a reminder that the crown is never a gift. It is a sentence carried by the willing. William reportedly said nothing when he read the letter. According to those closest to him, he placed it in his personal study, showed it only to Catherine, and locked the door behind him for hours. In the days that followed, William's demeanor shifted. Firmer, quieter, more resolute. He had heard the call. He had understood the weight. But he also knew that accepting the past was only one battle. The present still harbored resistance, resentment, and unrest. There were those who still believed they could rewrite what history had now carved in iron and ink. But while history now favored William, the present still bore resistance, and one last dramatic confrontation would push this legacy into the spotlight. The tide turned sharply when Queen Camilla demanded a formal review of ceremonial succession roles. She rallied allies, pressed Charles for intervention, and demanded William's use of the sword be ceremonially restricted. What followed was an explosive royal council session that left her stunned and William unshaken. Her objection wasn't merely procedural, it was personal. In her public remarks, Camilla warned of the dangers of romanticizing symbols from a bygone era, claiming that such actions risked dragging the monarchy backward, rather than guiding it forward. But those who listened closely caught the subtext. This wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. Her true fear wasn't the symbolism itself. As the authority that the sword seemed to restore in William's hands, behind palace doors, whispers escalated. It was no longer just an undercurrent of rivalry. It was an organized effort. A select group of senior aides, reportedly aligned with Camilla, began drafting new ceremonial protocols designed to curtail the Prince of Wales' public role. Internal documents proposed limiting his right to represent historical artifacts in state occasions, citing optics and misaligned generational messaging. The word restrict became the palace's favorite shield. But as rumors of a quiet rebellion spread, the walls of tradition began to tremble, and the pressure mounted until it could no longer be contained. In a dramatic and nearly unprecedented move, the Privy Council was summoned not for constitutional crisis, but for a ceremonial reckoning. Camilla arrived first, surrounded by senior allies. William entered shortly after, calm, prepared, and carrying more than presence. He carried proof. Before the eyes of those who still held power to shape royal precedent, he laid out the original will of King George VI. Then came the sword itself, inscribed with a message that none dared contradict. And finally, the letter. The sealed, authenticated prophetic message from a former king to the one who would follow not through bloodline alone, but through purpose. Then Catherine stood. Her voice, steady but piercing, broke the silence. She spoke not as a royal wife, but as a witness to history in motion. She invoked the future, the need for unity, and the danger of silencing truth for the comfort of status. "This is not about ceremony," she said. "It's about responsibility earned, not granted." Her words settled over the chamber like a final breath before judgment. The vote was swift. The result, the ceremonial rites would remain fully intact. William would not be silenced. The will would not be challenged. The legacy would not be diluted. Camilla, stunned and wordless, left the chamber before its final adjournment. Her silence was louder than any objection. And in that moment, William did not gloat. He did not raise the sword. He simply stood, resolute, unchallenged, unbroken, and seen. And as the dust settled, one last act confirmed William's destiny, making the sword not just a relic of the past, but a weapon of the future. In a stirring moment beneath the arches of Windsor, Prince William stood surrounded by history, legacy, and a future he was finally ready to lead. As the sword gleamed under the light of remembrance, the monarchy felt a shift, not of power, but of purpose. There was no announcement, no press call, no fanfare, just a single image captured quietly during a discreet visit to Windsor Chapel. William, dressed in somber tones, holding the sword not aloft but across his chest, as though shielding history itself. Within hours of the photograph's leak, the world took notice. It wasn't the object that moved people, it was the expression on William's face. Poised, reflective, resolute. As if the weight of a kingdom had finally settled, not around his head, but within his hands. The public response was instant and overwhelming. Support surged online, with messages flooding royal forums and international headlines declaring the return of the true heir. Across social media, images of William with the sword were reposted alongside captions like Finn, Ali, a leader who understands silence is strength. What began as a hidden inheritance had transformed into a modern symbol of quiet authority. It wasn't just monarchists or historians paying attention, it was ordinary citizens, young and old, who saw something deeper than ceremony. They saw a man who didn't demand legacy but accepted it with reverence. Inside the palace, even the old tensions began to soften. King Charles, reportedly moved by his son's restraint and grace, invited him for a private meeting, no staff, no aides. According to insiders, the conversation lasted hours and ended with a single embrace. For the first time in years, father and son weren't debating titles or roles, they were honoring a shared bloodline, and perhaps acknowledging that legacy isn't passed down by declaration alone, but through earned trust. Camilla, meanwhile, quietly stepped back from ceremonial affairs. There was no official statement, but her absence at several key events spoke louder than any press release. The Queen, who had once fought to control tradition, now watched it evolve beyond her reach. Weeks later, the sword was placed in a newly established wing of Windsor Castle, the Heirs Gallery. The exhibit was sparse, reverent, and powerful. At its center stood the blade, housed in glass, illuminated not by grandeur, but by a single quote etched beside it, "To him who leads through silence." Visitors reportedly wept. Guards stood taller. Even skeptics acknowledged the shift. The monarchy, so often battered by scandal and division, had rediscovered something ancient, an emotional thread that tied courage not to noise, but to grace. And at its center was William, not crowned, not titled, but recognized, a bearer of memory, a custodian of duty, a son who had chosen inheritance not as privilege, but as responsibility. And thus, a blade once lost, buried by silence and politics, found its voice again, not through conflict, but through the quiet triumph of the one who was always meant to wield it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.